these sort of rush strategies against you. So the second map I want to talk about is Scrapyard. So unlike the first map we looked at, this map actually has a long ground-to-ground rush distance. However, it's got a close air-to-air distance, meaning drop-based strategies or air attack unit-based strategies that are really strong on this map. I don't know about, I'm sure you guys experienced this as well, but when I'm playing on this map and I go for a very ground-heavy based army such as roaches, and when I have a sizable army, when I have like 20 roaches, I'm thinking to do a lot of damage to the opponent. So I leave my base, I'm traveling to the opponent's base, and what do you know? There's 5 Mutalisks coming into my base, kills all my drones, and the game's over even before I've even done anything to the opponent.
He's lying. That's never happened to him.
It's happened to me.
So like, this sort of situation, we would like to call internally as a terrible, terrible damage situation. And just like in the battle reports, for some reason, whenever this happens to me, Dustin is always there, screaming terrible, terrible damage. Okay, so the third point is choke points. Everyone knows about the choke points that are in front of your base, and everyone knows how to utilize them well too. But what a lot of people don't realize is there are choke points at different parts of the map as well. For example, on Blistering Sands right here, we notice that there's a choke point right in front of your natural expansion. There's a bunch of choke points in the center of the map, including the 2 choke points by the Zelnaga watchtowers. There's other choke points as well. For example, there's 2 choke points leading into the high-yield expansions. It's important to utilize these choke points when you're playing the game. For example, if you have a Marine and Marauder-based army versus your opponent is using speed-upgraded Zerglings, you really want to utilize these chokes. So when you're going for a push, try to stick to these chokes as much as possible, because if you fight at those chokes, you have the advantage, whereas if you fight in the open, the Zerg player has a huge advantage over you. So last thing is expansions. We talked briefly about when to expand and where to expand, but this varies drastically depending on what map you're playing. Lost Temple is an example of an easy to expand map. The choke point in front of your natural expansion is very small, and your future expansions can easily be defended by defending the 2 locations by the 2 ground-based paths by the Zelnaga watchtower. However, not all maps are like these, and it's important for you to watch replays, just try different things on different maps to figure out which expansion location works on which maps.
So I'm going to talk to you guys today about combat, and combat in Starcraft 2 is awesome. It's probably my favorite thing about Starcraft 2. And there's lots of little things you can do to improve your combat, and if your opponent is not doing these things, but you are, you can probably gain an edge over your opponent and win a lot of games. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is terrain. Now there's a couple key elements about terrain. There's choke points, there's high ground, and there's walls. Now the great thing is a lot of these elements can be found in and around your main start location. So you can use your minerals as a half wall, and usually your ramp leading out of your base can act as a choke and high ground. And all these things are great against melee units, units with short range, zealots, and you can, even if you have a very small army compared to your opponent, using the terrain properly can let you beat a much larger army. So here's a short video where we have Marines fighting against Zealots. And in this situation, the Terran player is not using terrain. You can see he has a wall behind him that if he backed up a little bit, he'd probably do a little bit better. But this is not a good fight for the Terran player. And we can see those Protoss Zealots just run over the Terran. Now in this video, the Terran player is using his choke. He's making the Protoss come to him. And you can see only 2 or even 3 Zealots at a time are able to get in on those Marines. And this is a really good fight for the Terran player. You can see that the Protoss player should have not fought in this spot. He should have probably backed up and looked for a more open spot. And along with terrain, we have flanking. Flanking is huge in combat. It's best used with swarms of small melee units like Zerglings, Banelings, and Zealots. But you can also make great use with flanking using burrowed units, especially a Roach who can actually move while burrowed. If your opponent's coming at you with Zealots, Stalkers, and a couple Colossus, and maybe his Colossus is trailing a little bit behind, if you can use flanking properly, you might be able to kill his Colossus before the rest of his army can even engage you. So let's look at a video of flanking. Now in this situation, we have Zerglings fighting Marines in the open, and this seems like a good fight for the Zerg player. He's fighting in the open, he's not using terrain, but the problem here is the scale. It's the size of the armies. Now because there's so many Marines and so many Zerglings, the Marines are actually creating their own terrain. units in the back, the Marines in the back, the Marines in the middle, they're actually getting blocked by the Marines in front of them. And the Zerglings are taking a very long time to wrap around these Marines. And it's actually, even though it's in the open, it's not that great of a fight for the Zerg player.
This is one of the things that I think a lot of players don't really respect, or takes a lot of time for certain players to learn at least, is that the counters in StarCraft change depending on the size of the armies. A large Marine army is a different beast than a small Marine army, and you have to sort of watch that army size and use the terrain like this Zerg player failed to do to see what's going to happen in a particular battle.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this video, same number of Marines, same number of Zerglings. The only thing we've done is we split the Zerglings into 3 equal-sized groups. And you can see how fast the Zerglings are able to surround the Marines, and they're very effective in this spot. So in the last video, there was about 8 or 10 Marines remaining, and now we have about a dozen Zerglings left. So this is a pretty significant turn. There's also unit control. Now, a lot of people in the community will refer to this as micro or micromanagement. But the key thing here is it's just controlling your units and getting the maximum benefit from your units. And there's a couple of things to note here. It's best used in key battles, but you want to make sure not to overuse it. You don't want to over-micro. If you spend too much time controlling your units, you might get some small wins with your Marines. Maybe you end up saving a couple extra Marines, but meanwhile your opponent's spending his money, and he's sending more and more units at you, and before you know it, you got 2,000 minerals saved up, and your army's just too small to overcome his. So here's a video of 8 Stalkers fighting 8 Stalkers. Nothing fancy here. Both players are just letting their Stalkers fight. And we can see through small variations in how the units path or how the units focus fire each other that even though it's a 50-50 fight to begin with, it's not going to go exactly 50-50. We can see that Red's up a couple Stalkers. And looks like Red's going to have 2 Stalkers left over against the blue player. So in this situation, Red is using micro. He's using blink. He's using focus fire. He's moving his units. He's basically doing everything he can to win this fight. And Blue is just fighting normally. He's not doing anything special. And we can see that Red is up way ahead right now. Red hasn't lost a single Stalker yet. And if this was a real game situation, he's got all 8 of his Stalkers left. He can make a push on Blue right now. Both players warping an extra 5 Stalkers, and now we got 13 Red Stalkers against 5 Blue Stalkers, and that's GG right there. And of course there's counters. Now in StarCraft we have soft counters and we have hard counters. So a soft counter would be something like the Marines fighting the Zealots in the open. It's not the best situation for the Marines, but they're still going to do a lot of damage. If you have enough Marines, you can actually overcome the Zealots. But in a hard counter situation, this would be something like Marines against Colossus. And now you pretty much wish you had any other unit to fight those Colossus. Marauders, Vikings, Thors, Banshees, Siege Shanks, pretty much any other unit. The Marines are not good. But there are ways to overcome hard counters using terrain or micro or other things I've already talked about. So let's look at a hard counter situation. This is 2 Banshees against 10 Marines, and this is an equal cost army, and we can see that the Banshees stand no chance. There's 7 Marines left over. Those Banshees should have not fought that battle. But in this situation, same thing. The Banshees are just going to micro. Now you can see they're taking a shot and they're moving away. And the key thing to note here is that the Banshees have more range than the Marines, and they also have very high burst damage. So if they move in between their shots, they can be very effective. And in this situation, we're able to kill all 10 Marines without losing a single Banshee.
So now that we've mastered all the basics, let's take a look at some pro games to see what we can learn from these pro games. The first example we're going to show you is an example of a proxy rush. A proxy rush is generally useful against a player that's greater skilled than you, and the reason is because it's really easy to execute a proxy rush because all you need to do is memorize one build order in order to do this almost perfectly. So we notice the red Protoss player is at the top. He's actually sending his first probe in the middle of nowhere to build his first building. The reason for this is because he doesn't want the enemy knowing which sort of proxy rush is coming. Protoss actually has 2 different proxy options. First is the proxy gateway zealot rush, and the second is a cannon rush. So the green player is actually playing normal. He's built a pylon right next to his nexus. He's using chrono boosts, and he hasn't gone out for the scout yet. So we see the forge going up, meaning this player will go for a cannon proxy rush. And generally speaking, especially on this map, it's really common for the for the player going for the cannon rush to block off the enemy entrance using pylons, and using cannons from below, he can actually hit probes and buildings that are on the high ground. So we noticed the green player is actually sending his first scout to the red Protoss base. And when he gets there, he's going to notice that there's no buildings there except probes or nexus. So there's two possibilities. First is the red player's AFK. The second is a proxy rush is coming. But because this is a tournament match, he's probably not AFK. So the red probe is finally at the green Protoss' base. And there goes the two pylons. This actually blocks off the whole entrance so that no ground unit can leave this base unless they kill either of those pylons. And the green player actually reacts by making a second gateway, meaning he probably expects a zealot rush coming, but little does he know, it's actually the cannon rush. So soon we'll see the cannons going up. And the only way for these cannons to shoot above is if there's a spotter. Right now there's that probe, so if the green player manages to kill that probe before he makes any buildings, he can actually stop his push. However, knowing this, the red player actually puts down two pylons above to spot for those cannons. And at this point, there's not much the green player can do, and the game is pretty much over.
So I can't tell you, well, I don't want to admit, how about that, how many times this has happened to me online, and the amount of nerd rage it generates whenever this happens to me. David, what should the green player have done in this circumstance to block this rush?
So the one and most important rule when blocking proxy rushes is to use your probes. Even if you use your probes to block this rush, he's not behind because the nature of proxy rush means he will be behind if the rush fails. Meaning, in this specific case, he can actually use these probes to kill the pylons to get to those cannons, and using zealots and probes, he can take out two cannons, and that's all he needs to do. And once you block that rush, you have a huge advantage. So the second video we're going to show is an example of an all-in rush. And just like the proxy rush, this is really
The StarCraft II Secrets of the Masters panel will now begin. Please give our panelists a round of applause.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
Hey.
It's a pretty good turnout for StarCraft. We always make the joke that Blizzcon has a lot of WoW folks, and we're always a little nervous that our peeps won't come out to see us, but hey, you did. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Nice.
All right, everybody, so this is the Secrets of the Masters panel, and what we're going to talk about today is how to really improve your game. Now, if you are a top-level diamond player, if you are in that top 200, we probably don't have a lot we can do for you, all right? You might get a little bit here, you might get a little bit there, but we're really not for you guys. But if you are one of the brave souls battling it out in bronze, silver, gold, or platinum, we are here for you today to give you some information that will hopefully level up your game and let you own all the noobs who didn't come to BlizzCon to know what you know. All right, to start things off today, I've got Greg Kness up here from the BattleNet team, and Greg's going to give us some overview of some of the things that are going to come for BattleNet down the road, and he's going to give you guys some insights into how our ladder system actually works, which won't affect your ability to fight on the battlefield necessarily, but could very easily help improve your game and give you a better understanding of what's going on in ladder and how you're getting matched and why you're getting matched against the opponents you're being matched against. Here's your clicker, Ben.
Thank you. Thanks, Dustin. And thank you to everybody for coming. We're super excited to be here. So just getting right into it, what I want to do is start off by, the first tip, as Dustin mentioned.